Welcome to Puck Academy, a show about how hockey players grow on and off the ice. I'm Jason Jacobs, the host, and each week I talk with players, coaches, and experts shaping the future of player development. Today's guest is Peter Masters. Peter is the longtime owner and program director of the Junior Bruins, a club hockey program based in Marlboro, Massachusetts. He's run that program since 1998 and spent 17 seasons as head coach of their top junior team in the NCDC before shifting into full-time program leadership, overseeing all junior, full-season midget teams, and the half-season Little Bruins teams. These teams have captured national championships, league titles, and hundreds of alums have gone on to play Division I hockey, represent the U.S. national team, and compete in the NHL. Peter also founded the Beantown Classic Tournament Series and served on the USPHL Executive Committee for 8 years. He's a Boston College graduate, former varsity hockey player there, appearing in over 130 games, and a member of the 1994 Beanpot Championships team. Peter's latest project is an initiative lead and co-founder of a school called Masters Academy International alongside his brother Chris. Masters Academy International is New England's first and only academy combining elite sports and top-tier academics to prepare leaders ready for the future, excelling in sport, school, and life. They're based in Stowe, Massachusetts. They're opening in fall of 2026 and will welcome middle school, upper school, and postgraduate co-ed day and boarding students. Now, I was excited for this one because the Junior Bruins are a legendary program, and so it's a fascinating look into the history of the program, how it came to be, how it's evolved over the years, the whys behind the decisions that they made along the way. We also talk about how the game's evolved under their feet during this time, the rise of club hockey, how the landscape has changed, how the skill sets have improved, how specialization has happened earlier, and the implications as players and families are navigating the development path. And of course, we talk about Masters Academy International, how it came to be, the 8-year grueling journey, some of the twists, turns, setbacks, and fortuitous opportunities that came about along the way. And we also talk about what to expect from it, the value proposition of attending, and how to think about academies in general and having everything under one roof versus lugging your kid around to everything a la carte, which is what a lot of people, including me, do today. At any rate, I really enjoyed this one. I'm appreciative to Peter for making the time, and I hope you enjoy it. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Your first ever podcast, I'm told.
It is. I see so many other people doing it. My brother's done a couple already, and I guess I get my first day here, so very excited.
Yeah, I told you before we started recording that I have never met your brother, but I listened to an episode that he did last night, I think with one of his golfing buddies or something. It was called like Beers and Careers or something. I don't know if you saw that one.
He gets a buddy from his club that he did it with.
You know, he didn't give the sanitized version. He, like the parts of the process as you guys are getting this thing off the ground that he had a greenish tint. Like he just said, like that crap was hard, or like we got it, we got a million no's, or it's been, I don't know. I just appreciate, that's my style too, is just like I just kind of have nothing to hide and wear it on my sleeve. And I appreciated that about your brother.
In private, everyone speaks a little differently than they do in public. You never know how these things are going to get cut up and sliced and used for you, against you, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully I can be, as open as he has in all of this. I think I'm a little guarded in general, but he had a really interesting one. I thought people who are trying to learn about our process and what we're doing is definitely a fun listen if you're in the car, that's for sure.
Well, I wasn't planning to start here, but that makes me think of a good starting point, which is you obviously grew up with your brother. You played hockey with your brother in college. You've been business partners with your brother for a long time, and now you're doing Masters Academy with your brother. How are you guys the same or different? And who does what?
Chris and I grew up just 18 months apart, and so hockey was, a major part of our lives. So we spent some time on teams together growing up, and then played in college together for 2 years. Back in the late 90s, I finished in 1999, had a cup of coffee in the East Coast League. Got 3 months into that, realized that I wanted to do coaching. It had changed my life. It took me from a player in high school that no one really wanted me to, after 2 years of playing junior hockey and having an incredible coach, to, having all kinds of college, big time Division I college interest. And so I knew I wanted to do that kind of for the rest of my life. So I got to December after graduating from BC and looked at my coach in the East Coast League and said, hey, I want to go start recruiting my team for next year and jump into kind of the club hockey world. Chris was 2 years behind me. He finished as well in 99, played in the East Coast League, picked up a bunch of concussions, and was having tons of headaches and said, this is crazy for $425 a week. Plus a couple meals to continue. So we've been partners ever since 2000 together. So we're going on, close to 26 years. We've had quite frankly, an incredible partnership. A lot of times family members don't kind of work well together, and it goes left, right, and center. But we've had a fantastic kind of working relationship for the last 26 years. He in general does kind of everything 16 and below in our programming. And I'll do 16 and above, so 16 to 20-year-olds, whether it's tournaments or camps or teams. It's kind of been split right down the middle. When this idea kind of hit us 8 or 9 years ago, I took the baton and, ran with it while Chris picked up a bigger piece of our kind of existing business and held the fort down while I, was spending, sometimes, 50 hours a week working on this. And so he's been an incredible partner to have. You also love having, someone who's family as well, because you know where all their loyalties lie and you're both kind of pulling for each other. And there's never been a fear of any of us kind of leaving each other and going off and doing other things. We've had opportunities to go coach, in college and some pro stuff along the way. And it's an amazing feeling to know that your partner is not going to walk out the door on you. And you can kind of hold hands together all the way through and create a business and a income for your family. And you got someone to commiserate with and someone to celebrate with that is as happy for you for success than, anyone else could be. So brief history in us, but it's been, perfect, quite frankly, partnership.
I mean, it's great that you've found a way to make it work. I mean, there's a whole department at Babson College that's just focused on family businesses. So like family business in itself is like its own beast. So I've never done it, but I can imagine that it's different than if you're just like, working with somebody that you were coworkers with for a few years or something.
Well, look, it gives you the opportunity to call them at any time of the day, on weekends, talk on vacations, talk at family dinners, all of that stuff without kind of interfering with what they're calling today work-life balance, right? That's just, there's just, hey, 5 o'clock, our phone's off. No, I'll call you at 10 o'clock and, we need to talk about something. We need to work on something or I have an idea. So that's been great. I think also along the way, a lot of those family businesses, sometimes, one person carries more of the weight than the other. And there's jealousies or, there's, hey, I do more, I should be paid more. That's never happened with Chris or I. And, for 5-10 years, I might be, carrying a bigger load and then it flips for a few years and he's doing it. And there's never been an issue about, how you, kind of chop up how you get paid and, how it works within the business. So it's really been easy.
I've heard on Chris's episode and I read a bit about your dad and about the origin story of the Junior Bruins. It sounds like an amazing story from what I can, and he sounds like an amazing man. From what I can gather, you guys grew up in Massachusetts playing, I grew up in Massachusetts playing Massachusetts youth hockey. I played for my town. Then I played for my public high school. Then I fell into D3. Like I just kind of did it the way it was done back then, right? And as you certainly know, it's done very differently today. But back then, you did something that I don't know anyone else from around here that did what you did, which is you went to play juniors. And actually, it was seeing the success that you had in juniors that led your dad to say, oh, crap, like we need to bring that model back to, here to New England. How did all that happen? Like, how did you guys get into hockey in the first place? How did you end up in juniors, and how did the Junior Bruins get going in 30 seconds or less?
30 seconds. I won't be able to do it justice to that.
No,
listen, I think
I'm just kidding about the 30 seconds.
Yeah, you got two pieces, right? My father, then how the whole hockey thing developed around here. Look, he grew up in Dorchester and Everett, didn't graduate from high school, went into the Army, got married to my mother, moved to California with $60 and a mattress. He tells a great story about how he was working for a computer company for 6 months. She was a teacher. He didn't get paid for 6 months, needed the money. The business then, he sent him a note on Thanksgiving. It was like a Western telegram saying, hey, we've gone bankrupt. Sorry about the money. You're not going to get any of it. And so he decided to break into the company, steal 6 months worth of equipment that he felt was commensurate with what he was owed. And he started his own computer company and retired at 54, 25 years later. And so that's the type of guy he was. He was an entrepreneur. He had no fear in kind of running his own business. He was a Massachusetts guy who loved hockey, but growing up in a kind of very strict Italian family, never got a chance to play sports. It was, you're 13 years old, you're going to work, and you're going to go to school and you're going to work. And even you got to forget school, you're going to work. Like, it's work. And so hockey was his passion. We got back to Massachusetts when I was 4 or 5 years old. We got right into it, went through kind of the normal track of some private schools at St. Sebastian's and Matignon, and then graduated, and I had no options. I was a non-stay back senior, so a lot of athletes stay back to gain that extra year. I had a cup of coffee for 30 minutes at Merrimack and Dartmouth on some visits, where I think really I ended up there because someone called in a favor and said, hey, could you take the kid and show him around, and then shut the door in his face and tell him he's got to get better. And so I graduated in 91. It was the springtime. I was going on a kind of like a school trip in the spring for seniors on a cruise, and we're all excited about it. And there was an event in Chicago called the Chicago Showcase that doesn't exist anymore. But it was like Team Mass versus Team New Hampshire versus Team Illinois and Team Minnesota. And I made that team, and it was during this, senior trip that I was going to take. And I said, well, Dad, I can't do it. I'm going to party. I'm going on this cruise. He says, you're not going anywhere. You have nothing. You have no place for next fall. You have a hockey tournament. You're going. And so I went out to Chicago, played in this event. A guy by the name of Dave Mournville, who at the time was coaching the Omaha Lancers, brought me and one of my teammates, Mike Santinelli, into a hotel room and put a VHS tape in and said, hey, we'd like you to come to Omaha. And the tape showed 6,000 fans screaming and cheering for hockey, which we'd never heard of junior hockey. We didn't know about the USHL. No one from New England had gone at that time, except the year before, Kenny Jones from Somerville. Ended up in Madison, but no one knew. There was no internet at the time. There's no newspapers. You didn't know where Kenny Jones had ended up. And so my father, I was scheduled to go to Lawrenceville as a PG, play 24 games, and go down to New Jersey, which was kind of an average, private school program in itself. And he just looked at me and said, this is 70 games. It's 110 practices with a real coach. We are absolutely changing direction, and that's where you're going to end up. Well, that league had a draft, and so Omaha was picking fourth, Dubuque was picking second, and so they picked me ahead of it, and I ended up in Dubuque playing for a coach named Kerry Eads, who was one of the best coaches I've ever had, and it took me from kind of a fringe Division I player in a year and a half to, quite frankly, getting a chance to pick from, some incredible colleges. So it was that development and the coaching and the level of competition and kind of the sole focus on the sport of hockey that got my father passionate about bringing it to the East. He took over running the Junior Bruins, which was a junior team that started in 1991, a combination of a guy by the name of Ted Kelly, who was coaching at Tabor at the time, and Joe Lyons, who was a full-time scout for the Bruins. They had been operating for a year. He took it over with the thought that, hey, maybe one day this is something Peter and Chris could run when they finished playing. And so when I finished playing in 97, the Junior Bruins were still waiting for me, and I took it over as a 24-year-old back in the spring of 98.
Now, in that year and a half that inflected your trajectory, with the benefit of hindsight, what was it about that year and a half that enabled you to do that? And how much of that came from you versus came from what was around you?
Well, look, you need the building blocks. You need to be able to skate, handle pucks. You have to have some toughness. You have to, be able to think the game really well. But I was just completely underdeveloped back in the 80s and early 90s in Massachusetts. There was no real fall hockey. You played New England College Development on Saturday nights at Hingham. That was one game a week. And then you went to your high school program, which started after Thanksgiving. You'd play 20 games. You'd have 50 practices, and then you'd be done by the middle of March. And most of the top athletes, at least in hockey, Canada Major Junior or over in Europe or the Midwest, were all playing 7-8 months, right? The USHL existed. We just didn't know it existed. Junior hockey existed. We didn't know it existed. And so I was completely underdeveloped as an athlete at 17 years old, and I got put into a program that was 70 games. It was 120 practices. It was with, our junior team had, I think, 18 of the 22 were Division I players. 3 kids played in the National Hockey League on it. So the level of play was better. Quite frankly, the coaching was better. The amount of time on the ice was better. The competition was better. And you either just rise to the level and improve and catch up, or you sink. And I swam, got my feet underneath me, and the first year and the second year kind of blossomed into a player that Division I schools would be interested in. But it was development, coaching, competition that did not exist in Massachusetts or New England at the time, other than a program here or two that was kind of I was kind of misfits because they were great players, but they just stood alone as a 1 or 2 team entity in New England.
So I'm going to parrot back what I think I heard Chris say about the origin of the Bruins, the Junior Bruins, and make sure I understand it right, and that will lead into a question. So what it sounded like was that when you guys started, it was with a juniors team that was a full season team for the older kids, to bring that type of experience that you experienced to Massachusetts. And then it sounded like the next step was, hey, we can say, hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you. Do you want to come play for us? And try to start from zero at that time. Or we can get to know these kids and build relationships and trust, and also be able to watch them and see who the best are earlier. And that led you guys to get more involved at the earlier level. So before I ask my question, do I have that right?
You do.
You guys are trying to get to know the best kids early, so that you already know them and have the relationships and trust later. I guess my question is, how much of who ends up the best kids later is recruiting and finding the best kids early and building relationships and trust versus development?
Look, you have to have an incredible piece of clay to develop, right? You can't take someone who's just learning to play hockey at 13 and 14 and can't skate and put them with the best coaches in the world and give them all kinds of ice time and expect them to develop into kind of high-level players, right? So it's a combination of two things. One, you got to find a great piece of clay to work with, and then you have to bring to the development kind of table all the stuff that they weren't getting other places. Ice time, off-ice training, coaching, putting them against great competition, creating great competition in practice, running practices and drills that, kind of push high-level development. Look, there's a lot of coaches out there that you can give them an hour practice and there's a lot of standing around, or they're just doing the wrong drills, or they're also teaching the wrong things, or they're concentrating on the wrong stuff. Some of them like to just get out there and blow a whistle and have a jacket and say, oh, I ran a practice today, but they're not really bearing down on, what does this defenseman need and what does the forward group need? And, how does our power play work? There's 15 different ways to run a power play. We just keep running the same thing over and over again that doesn't work. There's plenty of guys who just keep doing that, where a great coach will change it up. They'll watch video. So you really need both. You need an incredible piece of clay to start with, and then there are definitely coaches out there that separate themselves and are just better developers of talent over a 7-month season than other people. And those coaches, tend to be the most successful because the great pieces of clay find them, because they want to be the best player they can be at the end of that kind of season.
As I make the rounds and I talk to different people that are well placed in the game, one narrative that I hear is like the best have a twinkle in their eye from the earliest days. And like, if your kid was the best, you would know, because like there was just always something special about them. And if you look around out there, like if no one's like popping off the page and competing 2 birth years up and then no one there's going anywhere. Right. And then the other narrative is like, who are we kidding anointing kids as elite when they're, 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old? Like the best 8-year-olds aren't the best 10-year-olds, the best 10-year-olds aren't the best 15-year-olds, the best 15-year-olds aren't the, and so like nobody knows, and anyone that says they knows is full of crap. Those seem to directly contradict each other. How do you think about it, and is that tension real?
Listen, I think they're both right to a certain level. In general, your first comment about, hey, you were the best 6, 7, 8-year-old, and then you're going to be the best 18, 19, 20-year-old, tends to be true, right? If you can skate and you can handle pucks and you can think the game and you're dominant at 6, 7, 8 years old, and then you put the time in and you don't get derailed by, another sport or, size issues or girls or drugs or drinking, you usually come out the other end of the funnel as the best. Now, there are players who, for whatever reason, are not dominant at 7, 8 years old, but gained size. They're great athletes. They put more time into development. They just didn't skate a lot as kind of younger, but at 12, 13, they get incredible passion for it and they kind of pour themselves into it. That absolutely can catch up and sometimes go past those people. But in general, the best athletes at 8, 9 years old and kids who can skate come out the other end as the top players. Now, what level does top mean? If you're talking about NHL caliber players, yeah, look, Jack Eichel and Connor Garland were, Frankie Vetrano. Those were kids who came through our program who were incredible and better than, just about everyone at 8, 9 years old. And they put the time in and they developed to that point and they're playing professionally now. And no one at those birth years was able to catch them and grow from, hey, I'm here and they're like to do this. Maybe get a little closer, but as this guy's getting better, so isn't that guy. So the margin still, keeps separating. But, there's always a kind of a, hero story of a kid who at 10 was just okay. And all of a sudden he's a, 3rd round draft pick. That happens, but 250 players drafted a year, 90% of them were kind of in that top, 5%, 3%, kind of all the way along through kind of playing.
I don't have the data. You might have the data, but it seems like a large percentage, maybe even in hockey more in other sports, of last names on the jerseys of top players are recognizable because they're, one or both of their parents have, had played the game at a high level. Do you observe that as well? And if so, why do you think that is? And how much of it is nature versus nurture?
Oh, listen, I think your observation is correct, though there are plenty of, former, NHLers whose kids you never hear the name of, right? You just don't. But I think nature's a huge piece of it. These guys are incredible athletes. They tend to, marry high level, partners, right, who have same, passion for sport, right? And so mom's a great athlete as well. And then you also have the nurture part of it, that they know what it takes to become a great hockey player. And that's starting skating by 4 years old, right? And they're able to get out there and work with them and teach them stride and crossovers and hand position. And, as you're getting kind of those little, corrections and, being held accountable when you're 7, 8, 9 years old in the car ride homes, you're getting this great feedback from a pro, right? Who knows, these are the things that you needed to fix in the game today, or you didn't work hard enough, or you're not driving the net properly, or you're not winning loose puck battles. And I think pro athletes also hold their kids more accountable, when it comes to that stuff. And all those little things that you're getting at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old add up. And a lot of, parents who, aren't in that world don't bring the same genetics and don't bring the same nurture, to the, kind of the development stack that those people do.
For parents that hold their kids to high standards, there's different ways to frame it or look at it. one way to frame it and look at it is they hold their kids to high standards. They expect big things from them. They instill rigor and work ethic and discipline and process and achieving mastery in something. And those are valuable life lessons, regardless of how they project in a sport, right? Another way to frame it is, man, their kid doesn't even have agency yet, and they're just anointing their kid elite, and they're living vicariously through their kid and trying to make their kid something that their kid, like, might not even want to be, right? So like, what's a healthy way to do it, and what's an unhealthy way to do it from observing so many different kids and families go through the journey and playing such an active role in helping them?
Yeah, look, my father always said, push your kids, they'll thank you later, right? There's a narrative amongst, parents these days that, just let him find his own way and he'll work it out. And, 8, 9, 10-year-old, they don't know the difference, right? They need to be held accountable. They need to be pushed. And I think what he meant by saying they'll thank you later is when you achieve certain levels of success. Now, what level could that be? That could just be a great high school player for your local town, right? And you get to go out there for 3 years and you play a ton, you score a bunch of goals, and you get half the town out to watch you, and you're never going to play in college, but you had an incredible high school career, and it was a ton of fun, right? And you'll look back and say, hey, Dad, thanks for pushing me. Or it could be someone who played in college or even pro. I think the other piece you touched on is if your kid is not enjoying what he's doing and you're pushing him through it, you're making a mistake. Because whether it's hockey or something else, maybe it's wrestling or maybe it's baseball or maybe it's a sport you've never even done, he has to find something or she has to find something they really enjoy, because you can only push them enough. They're going to have it within themselves to do all the extras. And so if you stick with hockey, what are the extras? It's going out and shooting 1,000 pucks a week. Or it's doing, concentrating more at that skating school that really stinks, right? It's terrible to do power skating and crossovers. And mom and dad cannot force you to do it. But if you have passion for it and you enjoy it, you're going to put the extra work in to kind of achieve more levels. So I think for parents, I think it is appropriate to push them and hold them accountable, but hold them accountable and push them in things that they're really enjoying. And if it's not hockey, find something else. And even if it's not a sport, maybe it's music, maybe it's art, maybe it's theater. But get a kid to a place that they really enjoy it and then push them through that kind of process.
One narrative I hear a lot is it's a long journey. Don't turn up the grind too much too fast, because they're going to flame out. And by the time it gets time to really grind, they're already going to be sick of it. Have you seen that amongst players, and any trends around what types of players or what types of parenting ends up there versus having the endurance to make it all the way through?
Yeah, I've seen it all. I've seen absolute bear of a parent just pounding on their kid for 10 years. They come out of the other end super resilient, super tough, and really an exceptional player. And I've seen those same people, those same kids fold at 14 and 15 and say, this is a miserable experience. I don't want to listen to it in the car. I've had enough of it, right? And so there's not a specific right or wrong, quite frankly, in how you end up at the other end of the funnel. I think that the word burnout is sometimes, or at least the definition of it, is misconstrued. I look at burnout when you're a really good player in any sport at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and you're scoring lots of goals and you're making lots of plays and people are calling you to play on teams. That's really fun. Like, being successful is fun. And when you hit 12, 13, 14, and all of a sudden you don't grow, or you're not working at it as much, and you are not as successful, you're going to games and not being as dominant, that is sometimes misunderstood for burnout. Oh, he's burnt out because he's done it for 5 years so much. I look at it and say they're just not as successful, so they're not having as much fun. And so it's not necessarily burnout, it's just lack of success. So they go, I don't really want to do this as much anymore. I look at, I'm a big two-sport guy, playing two sports. I think doing 10, 11 months of hockey leads to injury and boredom, and I think you can learn a lot from other sports as well. But make no mistake about it, if you have a goal to be really a strong player at 17, 18, or 19, you got to do 9, 10 months a year with this. And it might not be all on the ice. Maybe it's shooting pucks in the backyard or stick handling 25, 30 minutes a day or doing slide board. But to be a master at your craft these days and to keep up with the Joneses, you got to pour 75% of your year into that sport. But taking time off, playing other sports, and then coming back to your main sport 2 or 3 months later, super strong, way to attack the next year. That's for sure, and avoid kind of physical and mental burnout. But in general, if you want to be super successful at this now, you got to put the time in, and that means more than the traditional kind of months that you and I did, growing up in the 70s or 80s, and putting the skates away for 6 months. Just not going to happen.
The landscape's changed so much here in Massachusetts from when you and I were growing up. I mean, when we were growing up, and I think we're around the same age, everyone just played for their town. And I mean, there were a few club teams, but like barely anyone even knew about them. And maybe there was like one kid from your team that might have done something else, like Assabet or Middlesex something. I don't even remember all the names, but now it's kind of flipped, right? Where town is really struggling, and anyone who's playing competitively plays for club, meaning you get kids from all over, and every year there's some turnover, like whether it's voluntary or involuntary, and so the teams are more transient. It's more privatized and for profit. What are the biggest differences as you see them between the landscape today versus when we were growing up, and what are the elements of that you think are good things, and maybe what are the elements of that you lament or wish weren't how they are?
I'm going to push back a little bit on kind of the concept that these club teams weren't a major part of kind of the development model for at least Chris and I, right? In the 80s, we played literally for 4 teams at the same time. You played town, you played select hockey, which was the Middlesex Braves. There was kind of a second level club.
The name of it. Yeah, Middlesex Braves.
Middlesex Braves.
Yeah.
There was a second level kind of club program called the Apaches that was, Chris had played on. And then there was what is now the EHF, but at that time was called the Metro. We had the South Shore Kings and the Minuteman Flames and the Middlesex Islanders. And so you were playing 7-8 games a weekend in 1986 and 87. So there was still a ton of hockey. I will tell you, I think the difference now is that was really just for kind of 10% of us crazies, were playing that. 90% were not. It was town. Maybe you played a little select, but you weren't playing a high level club. Now everyone's playing town/club, right? Everybody is. And, that started, call it 20 years ago when the privatization of these rinks started to take hold. And I'll slide it back to kind of the tournament business and how that's really changed. When we grew up, we put the skates away on April 1st. You went to a hockey camp in August to kind of get your edges back, and then you jumped into the kind of normal after Labor Day, you'd go. And there's a big tournament called the Sea Spray Tournament down in Pembroke, Habermark area, and that was like the first tournament of the season. When I started coaching back in, call it 2000, 2001, there were a couple summer tournaments that had started. The Chowder Cup had one. At that time, the event was like 20 teams for, let's call it kids 16 to 18 years old. And that was a big event. And one year it went to 32 teams, and that was like out of control how big it had gotten. And for guys like Chris and I who were trying to find ways to supplement our income in the spring, we said, look, these tournaments exist. We can charge, $200 for the weekend. We can make $1,000 for every weekend, and you'll make 3 or 4 weekends, and I'll pay for your whole summer, right? At that time when you were 24, 25. And so this kind of young group of, coaches started to see, these 20 teams are doing it. Now, well, I'll do it. Now you have teams from New York coming or Connecticut, and they started to grow. Now, if our tournaments are kind of less than 120, 130 teams on a weekend, you're saying, wow, this was a disappointment. Like this wasn't the type of event you really wanted to run. Our 2 women's events in the summer are collectively like 360 teams over 2 weekends. And so it's exploded. I believe that when it privatized, these rinks needed to sell ice, right, in April, May, June, July. And so they're all offering it. They all are trying to put either camp programs in or tournaments in there. And that was kind of the impetus of how all this really started. They wanted to sell ice, and guys like us wanted to make a few bucks on the weekend. And then on the club side, I remember, kind of a local, I think quite frankly, was out of the Walpole rink. They had like 120 kids try out for their elite team, and they were cutting 100 of them. And the director said, why am I cutting 100 of these? Let me just create a second and third level, keep them in-house, and I'll do better than the town. I'll give them more practices. I'll give them better coaches. I'll give them better schedule. I'll give them more tournaments. We'll give them better jackets. Like, we'll do stuff on the website. We'll kind of enhance the experience for the second and third level player. And the problem that he had was, who is he going to play? Right. So he picked up the phone and called some of his league partners and said, hey, why are we cutting all these kids and sending them back to town? Let's all create a second and third level so we can have a schedule. And they all looked at each other and said, of course, what are we crazy? Like, why have we been doing this for the last 10 or 12 years? And so now every rink has a club program, and, you've got a million people calling themselves AAA that aren't. And, quite frankly, most of the parents don't care. The kids love playing. They want a couple more practices a week. They want more games, and it's organized, and they pay a premium for it, but it's only grown. It's really what the customers want.
And reflecting on the state of hockey today here in New England, what are the elements of it that you feel good about, and what are the elements of it that you maybe wish were different?
Well, listen, the level of players way better than we were. That's for sure. I got a video, one of them, Billy Kelleher, who played up at Dartmouth, who had played with me growing up. Around his dad had kind of one of those big VHS like video cameras in 1990, and we played on an all-star team versus the Russian 17 team that came over in 91 or 92. And I saw the video about 6 months ago. Somehow it got to me, and the whole team was loaded with future kind of BU, BC, Providence kids on it. It was all high-level players, and our level of play was very average. Quite frankly, we were slow. We weren't that great of skaters compared to today. My junior team in 1993 won the national championship. So we went back for a 30-year reunion back to Dubuque 2 years ago, and that Dubuque team was playing the U.S. national team, and the skill level of those players was incredible. They would have beat us by 8 goals 30 years earlier. And our team had multiple kids playing in the National Hockey League, and everyone basically was a Division I player. So the level of play is much better. It's just faster, more skilled. Look, the downside on it, I don't really think there's a ton to it. These kids are exercising more. They're making friendships. They're challenging themselves. They're having some success. They're having failures. It's all stuff that kind of builds you as a person. So when hockey ends for 99.99% of all of us at 23, 24, they've got a nice kind of athletic, team face focus going into kind of the rest of their life. So, other than the cost, right, what it's cost now to rent a sheet of ice or buy a hockey stick or a helmet, or kind of all the travel that you're doing and what gas costs, I think the state of hockey is in a really good place, quite frankly.
When it comes to development, it seems like, especially as you get to higher levels, a lot of the development that players are going through is happening outside of the realm of their core team, right? They'll play on the team, but then they do a lot of extra stuff, whether it's edge work, whether it's the gym, whether it's shooting, whether it's video, whatever. Like there's a lot of options out there, a la carte, if you will, and it puts a big toll on families' wallets and also on families' time. It's quite inefficient. How much of the development do you think should be driven individually by a player and family versus by the team? Or, how much should happen within the walls of your core team and how much should happen outside of the walls of your core team optimally? And what do you see about how it exists today?
Well, look, there's only so much time a core team, can get a rank and you can get those 20 kids together, right? And that's usually twice a week for a couple practices plus on the weekend. And so parents who want to give their kids, greater opportunity to improve and be successful, I think is a good thing. I think the money they choose to spend, the time they choose to spend in the car or bringing them there, again, is all individual. No one's forcing them to do it. This is what they've decided to do as a family and kind of makes everyone happier and pushes the ball along. So, it's a tough kind of odd question, for anything below kind of 14 or 15 years old, because these kids can't drive, right? It involves a parent. When you're talking about 15, 16, 17, if you want to keep up with the Midwest, Canada, and Europe, you better be on the ice 5 or 6 times a week. You better be doing the off-ice training. You better be doing training on your own, whether it's shooting in the basement or doing, extra, edge lessons, if you want to stay at that level. And so because it is all, individual choice and all of that, great. You want to do it? Super. Pour your time into it. It's exercise. It's holding people accountable. It's mastering a craft. Like, these are all positive things for kids to learn and achieve. So, I'm all for it.
Last hockey-specific question, and then we can jump over. I know I want to save time so we can talk about Masters Academy, of course. Another narrative that's out there is that as individual skill has gotten so much better, IQ has really suffered, and teams aren't as cohesive. Players can't think the game like they used to. There's it's a collection of individuals versus a team. Do you agree or disagree with that? And if you, to the extent that you agree, why do you think that is?
100% agree. I would also add to that the level of toughness of the players, not only kind of mentally but physically, has gone down as well. Skill way up, speed way up, skating way up, all the stuff that you want to call, I would say, kind of manufacture, through just time on the ice and coaching. Why? Well, look, they're so structured at 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, right? In kind of their play, there's very little pond hockey, if any at all. The way that parents, quite frankly, demand, their kids be on winning teams, right, has pushed parent coaches to kind of win more. It's pushed leagues, to create schedules, to just give them more games that seem to count more, kind of to people's, happiness, where instead of you just throwing the puck out there and having fun and, just being creative and playing for, 6, 7, 8 years old, has all gone by the wayside. And that's extremely disappointing. And I think it's coming out the other end of the funnel at 17, 18 to kind of exactly what you're talking about, that they just don't think it as well, anymore. How do you reverse that? Virtually impossible, right? The customer wants what the customer wants, and they want more games and less practices. They want to cheer their boy or girl on more. They, have more fun watching games than, doing more practices. And so I don't think you're going to reverse that trend. I think on the toughness end of it, parents, coaches, leagues, rules, referees are just softer, quite frankly, in kind of how the game is played and what's a penalty and not's a penalty. And, I know, player safety is important, but, it's just the way they've, kind of developed from 6 to 15, 16 years old. It's just a, less physical, kind of less brutal game. So, the trade-off is more skill and speed, but there's just less kids who think it as well. And the lack of toughness is even greater than that, quite frankly.
Okay, now this is my last hockey question, because what you just said, maybe have to stick one more question in, which is toughness and grit. Can it be taught? And IQ, thinking the game, can it be taught?
Listen, I think the IQ part's a hard one, right? You can talk about, hey, you got to play with your head up more. You have to look for second, third options instead of just seeing the first one to shoot. Your better option might be a pass or a rollback, So it can be taught. It can be taught in practice, with certain drills that get you to think about second and third options instead of kind of what's in front of you. But it's not easy, right? There's a lot of kids that, I was terrible at, languages, right? Spanish. You could put me in front of a, Spanish teacher all day, all night. It just wasn't going to sink in. I could learn history, but not Spanish. And so I think some of these kids, you can, try to teach it as much as you want. They're just not going to get it. I also think, teaching it is, hey, I'm going to run you through a drill and tell you have to, think in a certain way. But that's gone that afternoon, right? Just gone. That takes years of continuing allowing these kids to kind of play more kind of free-flowing game, and it's just not going to happen. So I think that's hard. Toughness, look, that's a little bit of nature versus nurture, but there's no question about it. We have softened the game considerably over the last 25 years. Some would say for the better because, possibly less injuries. But in general, I think you can push kids through, hey, you got to play through, kind of some hard situations. You can push them to go to the net harder. You can push them to, in practice, to do more, I'm going to call it combat drills, battling for loose pucks and fighting to win, those battles. And I don't necessarily think coaches are doing a ton of that these days. So you can teach it, but there's a bit of, nature to it. Kids just have to be tougher. Kids just have to think it better, and it's harder to teach.
How much of this do you think is attributed to the lack of shinny that's being played? And even if we wanted to facilitate that, how do you bring it back given the scarcity of ice time and the cost and everyone's overscheduled schedules and the lack of freezing winters?
I think sometimes it gets that shinny hockey on the lake gets overplayed, right? In the 80s, it was colder. We had a rink in the backyard. You got way more days. I built the rink 15 years ago for my kids. I think I got 11 days if I was lucky. And definitely, 30, 40 years ago, you were getting more time. But we really didn't do a ton of that. I think that's a little bit of a romanticized view of kind of we were all out there for 50 days of winter, on the ice for 5 or 6 hours. That didn't happen, quite frankly. I was playing on 4 organized teams since I was, 8, 9 years old. I think how the outcomes of those games didn't matter as much. It was just go out there and play, have fun. We're going to push you to try to make right plays. But listen, I didn't get great coaching until I was in high school, right? We just had parents who were out there kind of standing on the bench going, change it up. Now the coaching is held to such a higher level. These coaches that are on the ice at some of this, these Minutemen Flames or South Shore Kings or Islanders or Bay State or whatever, these guys are really putting a lot of time into this, and they're kind of better than what we had. So, look, I think I would hope that from 5 to 10 years old, the focus on winning would disappear. And I think that would matter. But the days of, playing more shinny hockey, I just don't think they even existed as much as people think that they existed back in the day. I just don't think it was there. So
switching gears, Peter, to the last 8 years of your life. So you guys were, hockey guys, you were players, and then you, took over and then scaled this fantastic organization that's like the gold standard in the youth hockey world in terms of developing exceptional players. Now you're building an academy that not only incorporates an educational piece and has a big physical component, but it's not just hockey, it's all these other sports as well. That's not an obvious move for you guys. So where did that come from and why?
Well, the exact origin or idea probably came 25 years ago. I was recruiting away in 98, 99, 2000. At the time, we were recruiting only seniors in high school to play junior hockey, right, for 19 and 20 years old. There were no high school kids really playing juniors, at least for us, that I could land. And I kept losing to Winchendon as for PGs. And there was a guy named Mike Odessa who won a championship at RPI as a coach and was an NHL scout, a longtime kind of hockey staple. I just kept losing to him on the junior side, and Winchendon, Dan Driscoll was the coach at the time, on the prep side. And I couldn't win any of the high school battles. I just couldn't beat a prep school for a player. And I was telling my father, he said, well, let's just build a prep school. Let's just do that. And I go, yeah, that's funny. Okay, fine. We'll do that, Dad. Thanks. And so that was kind of the original thought on it. And then 8 or 9 years ago, Chris and I looked at, kind of the list of the top 15, 16, 17-year-olds playing in the Mass state festivals. And 95% of them, even though we've been in business for almost 15 years and super successful, most of our junior teams are somewhere between 10 to 15 Division I players coming off of it. We still were losing, a massive amount of recruiting battles to prep schools. Once they got there, you couldn't get them out. It didn't really matter the level of coach or our schedule or kind of where our placements were. Parents in New England want to marry their sports with their academics, and you can't blame them. There's just some incredible private schools locally, great educations, great facilities, and their teams have been successful, and their kids have gone on to kind of do some really special stuff in college. But there was a significant portion of them that were disappointed in the development, right? Because high school seasons were still 3 months. You had a supplement in the fall. You had real different levels of coaches. You had some good coaches, but then you had some coaches that were math teachers or history teachers, and they were on their 24th year, and they weren't really putting a ton of time into it. And there was a lot of politics to get played. I'm an elite player as a freshman or sophomore, and I'm playing, behind a junior or senior who I'm clearly better than, but they're older, and that's just how high school goes. And, our level of practice isn't great. It's the same 7 drills over and over again. And half of our games stink and half of them are okay and whatever. We're spending an incredible amount of money on this. And you saw the success of a Shattuck St. Mary's or a Culver or a Northwood who were doing high school, but doing kind of the full 7 months, number one, of training and play. You looked at junior hockey, which existed in the Midwest and Canada and in Europe /midget/junior hockey, where you're getting that 7-8 months of training. And so those players who were at 14 that were as good as any of those Canadians or Midwesterners or some of the Europeans they played in tournaments, 4 years later, they were far behind. And so you take kind of all these factors together and you say, look, hey, Dad, you might have been right. Let's create a prep school, but we can't create the same thing that already exists. That'll be an utter failure because, we're just doing more of the same. Let's create a high-end prep school campus, culture, and curriculum married to the IMG model of development, which is 4 hours of sport a day and 5 hours of academics, which already kind of exists in some small pockets in hockey in these Shattocks and Northwoods and Culvers. Some of the other Selects Academy had just popped up, down at South Kent. They were creating they had a private school that they were trying to prop up a struggling hockey program with kind of a different model than what their competitors are doing. And they hired, some of the best club hockey guys in North America to kind of run it. And they were up and running and super successful in the first couple of years. And so it started to creep into New England when the idea kind of came into our mind, but we wanted to do something bigger. We didn't want to do a mom and pop operation, kind of out of our rink, with some online schooling. We wanted to, again, create something that New England had not seen, not only in hockey, but in all the other sports that, people were passionate about. And so that's where it started.
And I mean, the obvious step, and it sounds from listening to Chris's episode yesterday that a bunch of investors were pushing you guys around like, why don't you just start in hockey, prove out in hockey, and then land and expand? But yet when you enter the market, you're entering across all these different sports. Tell me about that decision, both in terms of the breadth of the vision, but also in terms of the breadth of the vision at phase one.
To create a campus that could match serve with some of the other, top prep schools that existed, you were looking at a 60, 70, $100 million investment, right, to get to that level. And you weren't going to do it just through hockey. You were going to need more numbers, bigger enrollment, and you couldn't have 15 hockey teams. You were going to have 3 hockey teams and 2 baseball teams and a couple basketball teams. You're going to have to do boys and girls. And so we went to kind of all the other club leaders in those sports and saying, hey, in basketball, in baseball, in soccer, are you running into the same issue where your parents or your elite players were looking for more development than you could kind of get at a traditional kind of Catholic or private school? And they all said a resounding yes. I said, okay, great. It's not just hockey, it's all these other sports. Fantastic. So we don't know anything about running a school. We don't know anything about schedules. We don't know anything about financial models. I don't know anything about construction. I don't know anything about curriculum, visas, accreditations, all of that stuff. And so we know that the demand is there. We know that this is something different than everyone else is doing, and parents and students are looking for. It's worked in other parts of the country. It's worked incredibly down in Florida with IMG as they were cranking at about 1,200 students at that time. let's put a team together who can help fill out the pieces, because you're correct. Investors are looking at us and saying, hey, we understand education's a good business. We understand sports is a good business. Marrying them in kind of one of the most successful private school, areas in the world makes a lot of sense, but you got to put the rest of your team together, because you need 9 parts to this to make this quote unquote investable. So we spent almost 2 years putting our team together before we really dug into property and starting to build out, financial models and seeing if this is what, would be actually investable and would have a good ROI.
What were the biggest surprises from when you went into the process to today? And similarly, because for whatever reason, I like to ask my questions in twos, how has the story or strategy evolved since you first started telling it to today?
Well, the core piece hasn't changed a ton. The 5 hours of academics and 4 hours of sport is the core. Incredible facilities, coaches, academic team has all been kind of the 4 legs of the stool. We started looking for our first campus right next to the New England Sports Center. There's 8 acres of land that's undeveloped. And our thought was, let's kind of mooch off of the sports center that exists so we don't have to build our own rinks, right? Just rent and kind of.
Is that right behind the parking lot on the back there?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's owned by the New England Sports Center ownership group. And that was 8 acres. And if you push some dirt around, you could get 10 acres. And so we started there. And so we put our team together. We found a guy by the name Rich Odell, who was the head of school at IMG. If you go down to IMG, he's the only person with a statue on the property. He was their head from 99 to 2016. He grew the school from 0 to 1,100 students, took it from losing a couple million a year to making close to $30 million a year. He left in 2017. I called him up kind of out of the blue in 2018 and said, hey, we have this concept up here. We've got this land. Would you fly up and, consider working with us? And he did. And he brought his partner, who was one of the business leaders at IMG for 20 years, a guy by the name of Ted Miekma, up with him. Well, the two of them, actually, Ted came first and he brought Rich, but the two of them came up, looked at it, liked Chris and I, saw the potential of our building. This building puts over 1 million individual hockey, families or players through the building every year. So it was kind of a marketing machine. They saw the land. They said, hey, here's what we get paid, a month, to consult. And I said, well, look, I've got no money. So would you be willing to do this on the come, right? We'll keep the tab rolling. This should only take more than a year, and then we'll start paying you. And they said, sure, we'll do it. Well, it was 8 years later. And so they had no idea what they were saying yes to. But that started us, right? Getting the architects of the most successful sports academy in the world on board. And then they gave us the roadmap. Hey, we need to find this type of architect. You got to find this type of construction company. So I just cold called a bunch of architects and interviewed 7 of them and did the same with construction management firms and said, okay, this, is over my head. I don't know anything about what they're telling me. I need a project manager, right? And so I called Enzo Scalora up, who had been recommended as a, excellent kind of secondary school college OPM. Interviewed 2 others, but he came to the office as well. And I said, look, they're talking about price of steel and how many, heads of this department are going to work for us and, how much it's going to cost to move dirt and GNP contracts. And I don't know any of it. I need someone on my side. I said, here's what we want to build. And he says, great, that's what I do. And this is what I get paid. I said, yeah, I have no money. I said, would you do the same? Would you kind of work, on the come for this? And then it'll only be a year. And Enzo says, yes, I'll do it. And so 8 years later, he was still with us. And so that was kind of our, inside team to start. And then we, started to fill out the rest of it. But next door, the original architectural plans back in 2019 came in at $104 million on the 10 acres. It was $10 million in site work. We only got 1 field out of it. We had to build 5 stories high. It's super expensive, super risky, and not enough elbow room to grow. So we'd spent, a year and a half on that and realized it wasn't going to work. Pandemic hit, and we brought some advisors on that said, look, you need to go find a distressed corporate campus or maybe something that's gone into bankruptcy that makes more sense. So we started looking. And the first place we looked was the International Golf Course, which had just gone into bankruptcy. They had two golf courses plus a third, which was a 9-hole course. They had a convention center on property. They had a hotel with 104 beds. And I said, oh, there's our dorm. We'll use the convention center to do, our kind of school to start. And it's got this 9-hole course that will, once we prove concept, we'll build all the fields in the classrooms and dorms there, and we'll sub out the golf course to someone else. They'll run it, but it'll be a part of our business. And so once we did the numbers on that, we realized that was uninvestable, too expensive to build all that stuff brand new. And so extremely disappointing. And 2 weeks later, the real estate agent we were working with said, you got to look at this Bose property over in Stowe. I think it's perfect for what you guys are doing. They're downsizing. They're moving. That was their secondary campus here in Mass. They're moving everyone to their kind of world headquarters in Framingham. And within an hour of walking that property, we knew that was the right place for us. So it was 2021. And we didn't close on the property until 2024. So it took 3 years, and I could spend 3 hours on the left, right, and center turns on that property. But that's how we got to where we are. That's how our team came together, and we found the property, and that was almost 7 years in the making.
When it comes to these big kind of infrastructure build-outs and these long processes with, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars over, a decade plus or when all said and done, are there ways to de-risk it early before you bring the big capital in, or is it more like Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come?
So you're talking about after you build this thing out and kind of the first few years of operation, or you're talking about the development time and the lead up to get there?
I guess I'm talking about the last 8 years, like at now that you're close to opening, right? Because you're opening in September for business, or for, I don't know if you call it business, for school, right? For whatever. Yeah. Like you're, like, is that when now when you're trying to sign up students, the time that you figure out, like, is there demand or were there things that you did early on that gave you the confidence that, that it would be there?
Oh, no, you definitely had it. No one's going to hand you $83 million without kind of running that thing to ground. That's for sure. I think you started with just our general knowledge of a hockey family and kind of what they're looking for and what they're willing to pay to go to local private schools and get, what I would say less, development than was possible during that 7 or 8 months they were in school. So we knew there was a demand just from our side on the hockey side. Talked to all these other great sports club people, and they said there was the same there. You then look at some historical data. You look at kind of the demand down in, IMG, or you're looking at some of those other private schools that were doing it, like Shattuck or Culver and Northwood. And then you looked at some startups, right? Mount St. Charles is an incredible story. The folks that were running the Selects Academy project got hired to move over to Mount St. Charles. Mount St. Charles, older Catholic school in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, with an older rink and no dorms and, no real locker rooms, hired these guys. And within 6 months, they put 4 teams together that all finished in the top 10 in the country in year one, right? So they got 83 hockey players, to turn from the traditional choices to kind of go to them. And there were other, sports academy, hockey academies that had showed up. Spa up in New Hampshire had, 2 or 3 quality teams, taking classes in a rink, right, and doing this type of development. You had Level Academy at Boston Hockey Academy. You had, Cats Academy. You had Bishop Kearney start and kind of do the same thing as Mount St. Charles, partnered with a kind of existing Catholic school, and they had multiple national championship teams. So there was already 8 or 10 in New England that were doing what we wanted to do at a different scale, but we're successful with it. Then you start the process, and someone like Cognita, who's our partner at Masters Academy, did corporate diligence, and they paid a really high-end firm to kind of vet all of our assumptions and processes, and that was a 3-month process for them to go through and look at kind of the demand nationally and locally. And so, there were years of kind of diligence going into, will this work? And it was expensive, and it was time consuming, and it was all at risk.
From reading it, I mean, it seems like Cognita is not just a significant funder, but it's almost like powered by Cognita. And I guess it'd be great to understand that decision and what the difference is between powered by Cognita versus doing everything in-house, and what is powered by Cognita and what is done in-house.
Yeah, sure. So I'll back up a little bit. We found the Bose property in 2021. We had it under agreement for a 9-month period as we tried to get some permitting in place with the town and kind of run through the normal diligence on the property. When we had gotten to kind of the end of the P&S time, we still hadn't kind of had an agreement with the town in place. It had to switch from an industrial zone to kind of a school zone. And so we had to give the property back. We then spent time working with the town to get that permitting in place. And then once that happened, we needed to go find a dance partner in this. And that process took from 21 to 2024 when we bought the property without having funding in place. Quite frankly, we did not have a dance partner, but the price on the property was so attractive that if the school didn't work out, we had other ideas for it, from a business perspective. So we had some backup.
We could have spent a whole episode on those other ideas. We won't, but that would be fun at some point. At least over a beer or something.
Yeah, no, we did. We closed on May 7th, 2024. My partners gave me 3 months to land our funding. Hey, you've been doing this for 4 years. You should either get a yes or no really quick. And at that point, I'd probably run, 100 different possible investors through the building. We had either through the building or on Zooms and kind of making the pitch. And so every time you got to a point where it got close for someone to say yes, they go, well, what about this? What about this? And it was usually, look, we don't want to do the diligence on the property. We don't want to risk it until you own it, right? And so my thing was always, okay, so I have to buy a building for millions of dollars without knowing that you're going to come in. Yeah, you got to own it first, and then we'll kind of take this serious. So naively, I thought, sure, once you buy the building, the money was just going to flow in. Like this was going to be easy, and where they get to walk it and see it, meet the team, and see all our coaches, and that wasn't the case. So the first 3 months came and went, and we had some traction, but we hadn't gotten to a real partner. And at that time, too, Jason, to keep on schedule to open up for fall of 26, we needed to start the permitting process, right? We had to start schematic design. So we raised, close to $2 million in pre-development funds, all at risk, for those investors, right? If we did not get the funding for the school, we'd own a bunch of architecture plans and a bunch of permits that weren't worth anything. Just throw them out the window because we're going to do a storage unit here. We're going to turn it we're going to knock the building down and do 12 fields or whatever, other idea we had for it. And so that was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of stress. We got to that 3-month point, and my partner said, look, we're going to give you another 4 months. You have till January 1st of this year to kind of get a term sheet in place, or we're going to do something different with it. I met Cognita, was introduced to them in October of 2024. We had a nice initial meeting, thought it went well. Then I didn't hear from them for a month. I thought it was like 100 other investors that we had, spent some time with and, decided to pass. And then they called in November and said, we want to take another lap, and didn't hear from another month. And then they said, hey, we want to, put a term sheet together. This is December of last year. I think they're actually in their board meetings right now, their annual board meetings, that kind of next level happened. A day before the first, they put a term sheet, forward. We actually had 2 or 3 others that it had all kind of heated up to that time. And so we had a couple other dance partners in there as well. January 1st of this year, we started the process of negotiating the term sheet with them. Surprise! Again, I don't know anything about this stuff, but it took almost 6 weeks to kind of get that.
Well, you do now, Peter.
Yeah, buttoned down. But Cognita is, a worldwide leader in education. They run over 100 schools worldwide. They have, almost 30,000 employees. This is their second school in the U.S. The first one they've got York Prep in New York. We're the second one. They're looking to do schools, 8 to 10 over the next 5 or 6 years in the U.S., but this is their first sports academy. And so from, basically February to July, we, went through and.
One clarifying question. It seems like Cognita they mostly acquire existing ones, right? Versus partnering on launching new ones. Was this kind of an outlier case for them, or is this something they've done before?
It seems to be, right? First of all, they haven't done many schools in the U.S. They don't do a ton of boarding schools. They don't do sports academies. This is, again, by existing schools. Their financing is usually a little different than what they did with us. And so there was a lot of reasons why this, for their board was an extreme leap, of faith, and just kind of different than what they were doing. I think part of it is, it's very hard to buy, schools in the U.S. that are super successful because most of them are not-for-profits, right? Where in the rest of the world, that's different. Successful school they can buy because they can. And so I think they realized here in the U.S., if you're going to grow something like this to 700-800 students and, have this EBITDA and, all this stuff that kind of comes with it, you're going to have to do something new like IMG did, right? So, for Cognita, this was different. And I think that's why it took, as long as it did to get through the kind of the diligence process. But yeah, they are a perfect partner for us, right? You have the firepower of kind of their balance sheet and all their experience and all the kind of best practices they have in place, right? From HR to contracts to, student safety, like all of that stuff that, we would be able to kind of figure out because we've got a great, academic team on our side as well, but they just had it ready to go. So on top of, the kind of the investment, but, we're on calls, we were on a call for an hour and a half before this today, talking with, their top architect, out of the Middle East on finalizing plans for kind of the last minute changes on our property. And they had two or three other Cognita folks in there listening in and working with us. So incredible partner for us. Really, really got lucky to find a school operator like that to be in bed with.
Are they also involved in the curriculum and the teacher selection and the teaching?
No. Rich Odell from IMG is our CEO. We've hired our school leadership, so we kind of have our big guys in place. Our head of school, director of admissions, director of middle school, and our academic dean are all in place. They come from the private school for-profit world, really, really successful school group called the Avenues Schools. They had schools in New York and Sao Paulo and Shenzhen, and they've run some of the top schools in the world. As well, we have a partnership with the Newman School. Newman is a 80-year-old school on Marlboro Street. Mike Schaefer, who's the head of school there, had hired me to coach Middlesex 20-plus years ago when he was there. He then went on to run Kimball Union for 17 years, and now he's been at Newman for the last 5. And so between their curriculum, their teachers, their leadership, Mike, our school leadership as well, they've worked together to put the curriculum package together for us. Cognita, has their curriculum folks that listen in and offer advice and have questions and push and pull and stuff. But no, it is our team here in the U.S. that's really driving that now. When it comes to opening the doors, I think I heard Chris say yesterday that the goal was to have 250 students in the door for year one. I don't know if that's the right number or the wrong number, but it'd be... Oh, 275, sorry. So that was just off the top of my head. I didn't write that anywhere. I'm surprised I even got that close. Almost 50 after all. Yeah. But I'm curious how you're thinking about balancing, the pressure of filling it, right, with starting off with a strong foundation of quality because quality attracts quality, right? And also how you think about need-based aid or scholarships in the early years versus ongoing. And don't give any detail that you don't feel comfortable giving, but those are just some areas that I'm curious to learn more about. Sure. So look, it starts off with we want to be kind of best in class in everything we're doing, right? So let's start with the property, right? The property's 82 acres. It was a 360,000 square foot building. We're investing close to $70 million into construction in it. You'll have So you have 12 acres of turf field lighted. You'll have, so that's 3 soccer fields, lacrosse fields, 2 baseball fields. We have a Butler building, 12,000 square feet, high ceilings, that we'll do kind of think indoor like box lacrosse in, where you can do baseball, soccer, and lacrosse training, as well as 3 bays for our golf program for TrackMan. We'll have a 40,000 square foot brand new 4-court basketball pavilion. So we've got some incredible athletic facilities right from day one. We're building 197 dorm beds for the dorms. The dorms are in the middle of getting framed right now, but we have some mock dorms built. They're almost 300 square feet. We've now just, Rich, Chris, and I, my son, and our admissions director unloaded the truck from Dallas 2 days ago, hauled all the oak furniture in there, put the beds up, and now we have some mock dorms for families to see. But they're 100 square feet bigger than kind of college dorms or the average college dorms or prep dorms. We have a cafeteria for 350. That'll be gorgeous. Brand new classrooms for up to 700 students daily, new admissions, nursing suites, administration, study rooms. We have over 15,000 square feet of performance center weight room inside the building. So we're going to have a replacement cost for our campus is $225 to $230 million, brand new for extra. So campus is all world. Our coaches that we've been announcing, kind of dripping out over the last month and a half, are all best in class. Look, our fencing coach is the U.S. Olympic fencing coach who won gold in 2024. He was named the Olympic coach of the games for fencing. Happens to live in Littleton, so he's right around the corner. But we've got some incredible basketball, soccer, lacrosse people. Every one of our sports. We joke, we call it a bunch of Avengers. When we finally announce everyone on January 15th, we can get it all out there. We're going to take a big picture, and everyone's going to look at it and say, "Yep, those are some of the top people, not only in the area but in the U.S." Our head of school, look, Andy ran Avenue School in Sao Paulo, which opened up to 700 students in year one. It's rated the #1 school in South America. It's like a top 20 school in the world. And so he's got an incredible resume, and the people he brought with us on the school side are just best in class. And so for us to land those numbers for next fall while we're building a school and building curriculum and marketing materials and websites and all the other stuff that goes with it, you really had to have just kind of like an amazing team. And so we do have that. We have broken down our enrollment into kind of very specific silos. Our hockey team has been charged with, or our hockey directors on the boys' side are charged with building 3 teams, right? I think they've settled on U14, 15, and a U18 team. So that's, let's call it 54 students. On the girls' side, they're charged with a couple teams. That's another 36. And so when you go through basketball, lacrosse, baseball, field, fencing, e-gaming, golf, everyone's been assigned what we think is a, achievable number to hit. And they're out there, working like crazy. I think our soccer coach had 8 families on campus, yesterday. I'm touring 5 girls hockey families the next 2 days. We're looking at, almost 50 tours a week right now. And our Drew, who's kind of running our admissions right now, his schedule to get on a phone call with him is 3 weeks out. So a ton of interest. And for us, it's a lot of competition, but you've got, almost 30 kind of full-time people working to fill this school for next fall.
I've never built a school before, but if it were me, I would feel pressure to fill slots, but I would also feel pressure to maintain quality. And I would rather have it take longer to grow than compromise quality and start building from a weak foundation. But I would be worried about runway to clear the next milestone and getting, kind of airborne before hitting a wall, right? And I'm just speaking more with a startup hat on. I've never built a school, right? But does that resonate? Like how, like what do you worry about?
Oh, 100%. Look, I'm sleeping 4 hours a night if I'm lucky. You know what I mean? I could snooze till 7, 8 o'clock. Now it's, if I sleep till 5, that's lucky. And I think a lot of people on our team, the same, that, everyone's putting in kind of 12, 14 hour days, right now to kind of deliver on what you're talking about, right? And so we don't have misses, in kind of anything, whether it's res life or academics or the building of the school or kind of the recruitment piece, and then the delivery of it all, right? You're going to have to deliver a great schedule and a great practice schedule and the right, weight training program and mental fitness and all that kind of stuff. So, look, the reality was we were scheduled to close on all of this in April, May. And as these things happen, there's, it just takes longer than you think to kind of sometimes work through this stuff. So we didn't get to the July. So I think, we're probably 2 months behind where we would have liked to have been. And we're just trying to make up that time with just kind of working harder. But we think our enrollment goals and totals are all achievable to do what you just articulated as important, which is to deliver quality on the academic, res life, and on the field side. If, Mount St. Charles and their folks could deliver 83 students in a 6-month period, then we surely could do 50, is kind of our attitude. And, that's kind of the same on all the sports, right? Our basketball director, John Carroll, is the director of the Newman School right now. He, has the #1 team in the country. He left Northfield Mount Herman, where he had one of the top programs in America for 15 years. He started at Newman in June 3 years ago, so just 2 months before the school would open. He put 17 basketball players in that institution. They don't have a basketball court. They don't even have a cafeteria. They're on Marlboro Street. And they finished in the top 25 in the country. The very next year, they were a top 10 in the country. And last year, I think they finished second in the country. They started a women's program last summer, like a month before the school opened. And they picked up 12 or 13 girls. And they finished in, I think, the top 5 in New England. And so these people that we've kind of put in place to kind of lead our sports, again, are best in class. And it gives us a real advantage and cuts the time down that we need to recruit the student athletes that we want. So that's what we're betting on.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could easily keep going, but I'm sure you have a school to build, but so I should probably move towards wrapping up. But I have two things to, two reactions as I'm hearing this. One is, for any of the skeptics that say like, oh, like, let's see if this happens, and like, it's like, well, there's already 1,000 things that you guys have already done that they probably the skeptics would have said the same thing about. So it's like, look at the facility we got, look at the funding that we got, look at the partner that we got, look at the architects that we brought to the table, look at the, look at the coaches, look at everything. So it's like, all right, now we got to get high caliber students on this timeline. Like, it's just another thing that no one thinks we're going to do that we're going to do. Right. So that's one reaction. Right. And the second reaction is something that Chris said yesterday, which is like, look, like bet on yourself and swing big and go hard or go home. And like, what's the worst that happens? It doesn't work. At least we freaking tried. Right. And so I just come back to my favorite quote, which is about the man in the arena. Right. And like, you guys are really going for it. And whether it works, I hope it works. I bet it works, just based on like your, like just your track record of consistently over delivering. Right. But even if it doesn't, who gives a crap? Like, you guys are really going for it, and I respect that a lot. So,
well, thanks. Listen, we looked, we could do 5 hours just on the last 7 weeks of kind of the diligence periods, the twists and turns and the ups and downs. Is this on? Is it off? All that kind of stuff. But the thing where, this was in jeopardy 1,000 times over the last 8 years, right? There were 1,000 times this was not going to work, right? Or you weren't going to land the property. And every single one of those times, the most disappointing thing to me was not getting a chance to prove, that the demand and that something brand new like this could be built. And so now we're going to get that chance. And, we'll see if we do it, but I feel really, really good that we've got the team and the property and the location and the concept to get there. And so we're just going to keep put one foot in front of the other and keep grinding to get us to the fall of 26. And I think it's going to be fantastic.
Well, I'm rooting for you guys because, I mean, I want it to work. I dig the vision. I dig IMG. I'm going to ask a question that I think for any parents that, or players/students that are at the age of contention where this might fit in the profile of the things they're considering, here's one thing I think would be on their mind. So I want to ask it and give you a chance to address it explicitly, which is, man, like, you guys seem like the kind of guys that can pull this off. And man, I want this to work and I love this vision. And man, once this thing gets into orbit and all the kinks are worked out, it's going to be fantastic. And I don't want to be the freaking guinea pig. Like with anything new, that you don't want to be like in V1 of any new thing, right? Because there's a bunch of kinks to be worked out and you don't want to be the sacrificial lamb. So I'll just give you a chance to address that explicitly, since I suspect it might be on a lot of people's minds who might be looking at the school.
And part of the diligence process, I went to London to meet with Cognita's CEO and CFO kind of for the final, right? Face to face, like, hey, we're ready to go, but we want to have a few more questions for you. And they said, what are the things that scare you the most? And I gave them a couple of things, but the real thing was kind of what you're hitting on. I don't have a field to show you. I don't have classrooms. I don't have teachers running around. I don't have food service. You don't have the dorms done. You are buying into a dream. And what I would tell parents is, if you're looking for private school education and you are primarily doing it because you want to get a better sport option than your local public school, you have to come take a look at us. And what does that mean? Take the hour tour, get on the phone call with Drew, because all of those concerns about, I don't want to be the guinea pig or what is this going to look like, 99% of all that stuff goes away once you sit with us, meet with us, talk with our coaches, talk with our academic people, feel in touch what's going on over there, because we are just going to give you a completely different development outcome over a 3 or 4 year period than any of our contemporaries. It's just impossible for them to give you the amount of time. So if you have interest, call us, spend an hour, and I think that whole guinea pig mentality is just going to go away.
So for anyone listening that wants to learn more, what is the best way to get in touch with you, or what process should they follow to open up communications?
Yeah, just Google Masters Academy International. It'll pop right up. You'll have a little button on there that says inquiry. It'll get you right to our admissions office. You can email me directly if there's a particular sport. Hey, I'm a figure skater. I'm a soccer player. All the coaches are being updated. You can click to them directly, call the soccer coach first, call the admissions first. You want to find me, dial the Junior Bruins number, get me at the office here, and we'll return all your calls and inquiries within 24 hours.
Amazing. Well, this has been an unbelievably deep and wide-ranging discussion. I greatly appreciate the time, especially with so many things you have going on. Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I did, or any parting words you'd like to leave for listeners?
No, listen, Jason, really excited about this. I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of the same questions that you have, and so I hope people take some time to listen to this. And again, don't be afraid to follow up. We won't bite, and I think you'll really enjoy learning about us. So thanks for having me on.
Well, I love getting to know you a bit, and I'm really rooting for you guys. I want it to work, and I'm excited to see how it goes. So thanks.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for listening to Puck Academy. If you enjoyed this episode, follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast and share it with someone serious about their game. See you next week.